just start out by sharing with y'all the headlines. Y'all know the headlines. I think the solutions are in the nuance, but we always have to kind of remind us of the magnitude of the problem. So one of the headlines to me is more than 1.1 billion people, no access to electricity. And quite frankly, nobody wants a KWH. Nobody even knows in the US what a KWH is. But what they really care about is energy services, whether it's lighting or charging or refrigeration or washing and drying of clothes. I mean, these are the things that people want, and we can't forget in the provision of electricity that what we're really doing is providing services. That resonates with people. And it's just not providing electricity to a residential community, but equally maybe more important for the economic development of a community is providing electricity to irrigation, to some of the businesses, milling, go through the list, to really kind of grow and develop and produce jobs and growth within the community. We won't talk about this today, but I think it's equally important to understand more than 1 billion people are connected to the grid but get unreliable, unpredictable electricity. And that really hampers the growth in some of these areas. And let me just kind of step away as we kind of have those headlines to give you 2 more headlines that really exacerbate the challenge that we have. If you look at the population growth worldwide, we're going to go from about 7.3 billion people today to roughly 9.8 billion people by 2050. Now that's going to put a huge, huge stress on energy, water, food, education, health, huge stress. And I've come to believe, from talking to a lot of smart people around the world, that getting it right with respect to access to electricity increases the probability you can solve water and food and other problems. I've always been kind of stunning to me that people that talk about these health issues and all these other issues in low-income countries never, ever really kind of back up and say, but they don't have electricity. And that blind spot, maybe because all of us in high-income countries, electricity is ubiquitous, it's back of mind. We don't really think about the role that it plays in our own society. And so we forget the role that it may play there. But I think to get it right on these other issues. And if you think about increasing the population 2.5 billion, put that, and this is a great factoid, there were only 1 billion people on Earth in 1800, a little over 200 years. And now we're looking at such a huge increase in people. The fastest growth is in the low-income countries around the world. And the fastest growth is in sub-Saharan Africa. What we're really looking at is maybe 1 billion people added to sub-Saharan Africa between now and 2050. And I think that's a remarkable fact. I mean, IEA points out that today there's more of 600 million people with no access to electricity there. And by 2040, they predict, even with all the good efforts, all the work that's being done, all the creativity, all the support of the government or not, depending on the country, but with all those efforts, there'll still be 500 million in 2040 with no access. I think that's unacceptable. And I think what we have to do is be highly motivated to go about solving that problem in the future. I think the other thing that I would point out is that the other demographic is a shift from rural areas to urban areas. In the US and other high-income countries, we're almost at that 70-30, where 70% of the people live here. But if you look at the world statistic simply says that 50% of the people in the world live in urban areas. Where it's really going to go from rural to urban is really in the low-income countries. You can see it in sub-Saharan Africa happening. All you have to do is be in Kenya and walk through Kibera. People come from the rural part of the country, they go to Kibera. If you ever walk through what the government calls, kind of interestingly, an informal settlement, I don't know what the hell that means. It's a slum to me when you walk through it, and I just walked through it in the last couple of weeks. If we can provide electricity to the rural areas, and we're thinking about it, that may well slow down this migration to the urban areas, especially if we can create jobs and opportunities for people in those areas. Now, I kind of believe that there may be lessons we can learn from China and the US. And it may be a simple lesson of what not to do. I mean, China did a remarkable thing, lifting 400 million people from poverty into the middle class, but they built a zillion coal plants, increased emissions dramatically of CO2 to do it. I wouldn't suggest for a minute that that's the right approach to solve the problem in these areas. But it's a lesson learned. I'm not sure I'd dam up a river and create a 22,000 megawatt hydro facility. I mean, that's huge. I mean, to put it in context, that's more megawatts that are needed to supply the whole state of North Carolina for electricity. So, but in the US, there may be lessons, not clear what the lessons are, but I think it's worth paying attention to how electrification started in the early 1900s to see if we can draw any conclusion from that. I think what I see when I look around the world and I talk to people is that we're testing different technologies and different business models. I'm not clear what the roadmap will be. Y'all will figure that out. I'm not clear that we're either on the right path. But I look at solar lanterns and the role they play on the first rung of the solar ladder. I look at home solar system and pay-as-you-go. I look at microgrids, and I go, microgrids, not so much in East Africa because of the way the population is set up, primarily in India, where there's greater density in the villages, as well as the potential in West Africa. But at the end of the day, microgrids will play a really important role. And just as a footnote, electrification of the US really started with a series of microgrids around the country that were interconnected and built larger plants to reduce the unit cost, with this relentless focus on affordability in the US. And that might be the best lesson we can take, not the building of coal plants, but the relentless focus on affordability. And that's what we have to have in terms of getting this done in all these countries. You know, you can't imagine, I mean, the technology's there. Solar prices are falling, wind prices are falling, storage kind of uncertain, but I'm a technology optimist. I believe those costs will come down, the efficiency will improve, and they will enhance our capability to use renewables in these remote areas. I think that, you know, think about it. I mean, who would have guessed 10 years ago that cell phones and mobile banking would be key to the electrification in East Africa? Nobody would have guessed that that technology would help drive the electrification of that region of the world. And I just wonder what technology is coming that will allow us to accelerate that going forward. Now, let me say that I believe that y'all know the challenges, but let me do it at 60,000 feet because I kind of operate in that world. Actually, I fly a lot, and I think better at 35,000 feet. I think it's the oxygen deprivation I enjoy. But let me just kind of give you my view of the challenges. Government policy. You know, if you put tariffs on solar panels, you're going to slow down the deployment in the country. And it's actually not so much the policy that's being implemented, it's the policy that's not being implemented that I think is really critical. Investment, capital. I mean, the power sector in high-income countries is the most capital-intensive industry in the world, and you need more capital to really drive this in low-income countries. Limited capability to pay is a huge issue, although one of the byproducts of providing electricity, particularly pay-as-you-go model, is building a credit history that will expand the capability of people to really want more services in the future and to kind of move more and more into a 21st century world. We talked about technologies. I think progress is being made. More needs to get done. And I guess the last thing, and this is kind of I can say it, but I haven't lived it, so I don't know. But it's really capacity building in these individual communities and capacity building at the universities within these countries. That's really critical because it leverages the capability of people on the ground to really move forward and to lead in these areas. And let me just emphasize one more time, it's just not about residential customers, it's about building access to electricity to drive the growth in the economy and the building of businesses.